Hello and welcome to the e-commerce leader series, the podcast dedicated to helping senior leaders and founders navigate the future of online retail with AI. I'm your host, Bryan Kinghorn, Head of Growth at Luca AI. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Erin Murray, who's the CMO at Avatara Skincare. Avatara has built a strong reputation in the beauty space, so I'm looking forward to more of this conversation today. So Erin, thank you very much for joining us. Before we dive into Avatara itself, would you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you ultimately ended up here?
Yeah, so I originally had started my career in merchandising and planning in the corporate retail space. So brands of the names of like Pottery Barn Teen and Kids and Sephora, Gap. And then kind of moved over into marketing, with some of my stint over at Gap, and then decided I really wanted to move to the brand side. My career has always kind of sat at the intersection between brand building, consumer behavior, and retail growth. And I would actually just argue to say omni-channel growth. I've always been obsessed with the customer and like how the consumer thinks, why they pick up a certain product, why one piece of content will, gravitate towards more than the other. The mind is just really, really fascinating to me. And I think marketing kind of lends itself really well in that regard. Yeah. I've had the opportunity to help scale brands like Tatcha, Peace Out Skincare, Aquas and K18, Mad Rabbit, and many others across other verticals as I am fractional and do a lot of other strategy work. But my goal is always like taking products from emerging concepts to categories. That's just something I really love doing. I'm like, oh, you don't know about this brand? You don't know about this category? I'm in. I love a project and a puzzle. It's really, really fun and exciting for me. With Avatara, what drew me was an opportunity to help build a skincare brand for a generation that approaches beauty completely different than previous generations. And I'm also really seeing that I have a 12-year-old, I'm seeing it with her. So I'm like reliving beauty and all of my beauty experience through the lens of her eyes, which is really interesting. Today's Gen Alpha and Gen Z, they're not discovering products like through the traditional advertising, through a meta ad. They're discovering them through creators, communities, peer recommendations. And so I think it's a really fun time. It's also a really challenging time to be, in the field that I'm in, because trying to build loyalty, to build long-term, customers, that's something that's always kind of the big unlock for marketers like myself.
Yeah. Nice. And what initially attracted you to this space in general, like beauty, skincare, that type of thing, and so like that specifically, and then when was there a particular moment in your career that you realized that, products weren't necessarily what sold? It was like the relationship between the brand and when did that click for you?
Yeah, so funny enough, I actually grew up in a hair salon. Not that my mom was a stylist, but she was in the industry. And so I kind of was immersed into beauty from a very young age. But I think for me, the real entry point was when I was working for Sephora, helping build their e-commerce business back in 2011. I joined the organization and they were like, we don't have a roadmap. No one's ever been in this role. And I was just coming off the tails of Pottery Barn Teen and Kids in Williams-Sonoma, where everything was very structured. Everything was inside this, very organized box. And for me, I think I was always wanting to do my own thing and thrive in an environment where I had to figure out what that roadmap looked like. So that was actually my real, from professional experience into beauty. Moved over to Gap for an opportunity. They recruited me over, but I really missed the energy of beauty. I like to tell people that, a lot of people are like, compare what I do to tech and how different they are. And in my mind, while the products are different, the price points are different, and the solutions are slightly different, the innovation is not. In fact, I would actually argue beauty's speed to market is probably faster than most categories out there. Up until recently, where I think the industry is getting a little bit more saturated and we're having to find more niche categories, I would say, it was speed to market was always the question of how are you going to win? Now, to your question around the product piece to more than product, I would say, I would argue to say 80 to 90% of beauty's consumers are women. And I would argue also that people don't buy a product because it's cool. That's in theory, like that's a really surface way to approach it. But people buy products because it's the way that you made them feel. So example, if you look at the recession that happened in 2008, women were buying lipsticks nonstop. If you look at what happened with COVID, people were buying skincare products nonstop because it was that luxury that the brand it kind of was communicating, that community that they were building, that world building that helped them escape some of the realities of what was going on in the world, whether that was, a pandemic or recession. People just want to feel special. They want to feel like themselves. And beauty really lends that confidence in a way that I would say not a lot of other a lot of other categories can lend themselves.
Yeah. And you briefly touched on it in the introduction part earlier, but how has that consumer changed since you first entered the industry?
I think the consumer has changed a lot because since I've entered the industry, we had big brand marketing. We've had influencer marketing, which had a huge boom. We had, hey, we're going to create all of these categories that never existed. And there was a lot more open white space in the market. Now the market is very saturated. There's a lot of different brands. There's a lot of different categories. What maybe it took $25,000 to invest in a brand now would cost you six figures to build a brand from, at infancy stages in the beauty space. So I think that's really different. On top of that, I would say people, I think the way that people are digesting or ingesting content now is way different than when I started. We have so many social media platforms. We have so much communication hitting us like left and right. And so I think that the way that the consumer digests, I actually think they're more skeptical than they were at any other time before, because of all of the information we're being fed and how small the world really is. So I think in that regard, it's not about who's dominating the category. It's not about who invented the category. It's about how a brand can adapt and adjust and really craft and create strong storytelling, strong brand recognition, a strong community. I actually argue community is more important than conversion in some regards.
Yeah, no, I totally understand you. We're bombarded with information from all angles now, and I'm thinking about just everything. Whatever you consume in your house and your outside. There's lots of information, and then beauty itself is obviously a big space, big market. So I suppose attention is obviously key, but trust, I assume, is key for a beauty brand as well. So how do you sort of blend that attention grabbing and trust element to gain new clients or retain?
I think that's a really good question. So I would argue like trust is really important with Avatara as an example, because our core customer is 10 to 17. So, I think if you look at what was kind of happening in the beauty space recently, what they call the Sephora kids, all these Gen Alphas using products because they're being marketed on YouTube, et cetera, for products that they shouldn't be using on their skin. As an example, that trust factor for parents has become really heightened, right? So for us, it's not about just getting their attention through like fun experiences and showing them like-minded creators that they see themselves in. It's also making sure that we're doing our due diligence on providing the right data, the right regulatory support, the right information around to parents particularly as well, on what is right for a younger skin's demographic, right? We don't need to be using tons of acids and all different types of ingredients that a lot of products claim that they have on skin that's, new and kind of really evolving and hormonal and changing. You want to give them something that's simple. So I think that trust factor, I think it's combining that information, really ensuring that you're providing the right education for the consumer to feel really empowered.
Yeah, nice. And I suppose another aspect of you as a CMO, you've constantly got that balance between, brand building and building the brand in the right way, and the performance marketing element of what is needed as well. So how do you think about that balance at Avatara?
We're actually going through that right now. So funny
Okay.
enough, about 90% of our business actually comes from retail. It's not surprising because if our core customer is 10 to 17 years old, they don't have a TikTok account and they're not buying things on TikTok Shop. They're not buying a lot digitally, but what they're doing is they're entering the brand through a digital experience, primarily like through a YouTube as an example. And then our older customer, who like the 15 to 17-year-old, probably sees us on TikTok, right? But they don't have, they have the purchasing power, but they don't actually have in terms of influence, but they're not actually purchasing. So where we see the customer actually purchase is when they're at a Walmart or they're at a Target and they're like, hey, I'm shopping with my mom. Mom, I'd like this product. I saw it. It's good for teens, da, 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 da. And then they put it in the basket and the mom purchases it. So I think there's like a balance there. And so the way that I think about, brand marketing as well as performance marketing, I think there's a couple things, right? Performance marketing is only as good as the brand awareness that you have. So both kind of have to be firing at the same time. I also think when you're thinking about attribution rates, there's a blur. You're not always going to see the conversion happen online. You may see that conversion happen in store. And so, sometimes the way that we're thinking about performance marketing isn't necessarily like we're going to get that return right away. We're constantly analyzing holistically our business to understand, did we see an increase in basket size at, Walmart or Target? Did we see a returning customer? Are we seeing customers as an influx in terms of our community growing? We're kind of looking at a lot of metrics to ensure that we're really measuring success properly, because I don't think one conversion is where you're going to say, oh, I saw success there.
Yeah. And so on that, you obviously you touched upon returning customers there. So given your channel mix, how do you think about retention? You're not a purely e-commerce business where you can track it a lot easier. So yeah, talk to us about how you think about retention, how you're tracking it as a omni-channel business.
So in terms of omni-channel business, obviously we're also limited on what reporting we can get from our retailer partners. So I think, it is it's a little bit harder to track. Yeah. I would also argue to say the 10 to 17-year-old who's maybe buying a face mask, that might be a grab and go impulse buy. So the way that we're trying to really build stronger retention strategies is through our daily skincare products. They have a higher AOV, but we have to put more intent. We have to really educate the consumer to get them to convert in that way. And so those are a couple frameworks that we're looking at, is how is that doing? How is that performing? What do we need to do there better to build a stronger, loyal customer over time?
Yeah, nice. Awesome. And I suppose then moving on to more of the data and then coming on to the AI side of things, e-commerce leaders now are bombarded with data. We've got more data than we could ever need as humans, and can ever cope with as humans. There's just so much different platforms out there that help us run our businesses. So for you as a marketing leader, within an e-commerce, omni-channel business as well, what are the metrics that matter most to you? What are the metrics you're looking at daily, weekly, monthly to really get a grasp on, where the business is?
I think in terms of what we're looking at, obviously we're looking at basket size at our retailers. We're looking at community engagement, but not looking at community engagement for the surface purposes. It's really are we gaining market share? Are we moving the needle? Conversion is obviously important. We want to be growing year over year, but I think it's looking at the lifetime value of the consumer. Is that growing? Are we growing, holistically? Is what we're doing from a brand awareness perspective performing, in a way that we're starting to see a lift? Sometimes our lifts are longer. It doesn't always happen short. It's not always a short-term lift for us. So it takes time for us to build that swell. I would also say, obviously we are looking at, return on investment or ROAS, but I don't want to look at that as the number one end all be all number, because I think, again, today's world, like a return on investment to get a 3x, a 4x, it's harder and harder. So I think there's a couple of other factors that we're trying to look at to ensure that, you know, our business is continuing to grow. The other thing I would probably also say is like sessions. So we are looking at sessions. Are people coming back? So that if they're coming and they're not converting, what do we need to do to improve that to ensure that our business is actually going in the right direction? Those are a few other things that we're sort of looking at.
And in regards to, you know, helping you keep an eye on all these metrics, what like techniques or tools are you using within your role with Avatara to just help sort of understand all this data that we've got access to?
Yeah, so I think we are leveraging AI quite a bit to optimize the reporting. It's really helped us be able to move in a much more nimble way. I think too many times leaders get too fixated on the reports being exact and then having every single data point. But the problem is you need to have a balance of having the right data, but also the right intuition to make moves. And so I think it's leveraging the data as a subjective support, right? Obviously the data doesn't lie, but then it's like, how do I make it, you know, intuitive decisions to grow the business and take risks? Because if you don't take a risk, you'll never know. But obviously it needs to be in an informed manner. But the team has built out, particularly we have a director of marketing who just really wanted to learn AI more and build out all these fun dashboards. So it's really helped automate our business in a way that helps us make decisions that much easier.
Yeah, nice. And then on the wider sort of adoption of AI within Avatara specifically, and you know, then your role as well, what are you using, or how are you using AI within the marketing space specifically?
Yeah, so I think in terms of how we're using it in the marketplace specifically, there's a couple ways. Like there's a lot of hype right now in AI, as you probably know. I've had so many conversations about AI, whether that's been on a panel or a podcast or just like professional conversations. But I think at this point, we're moving from experimentation to practical application, which I think is exciting to see. The noise that I like keep hearing around AI that it'll replace marketers, creatives, or founders, I don't think so, actually. I think there is a humanity component and a creative direction that happens, even just having a conversation with you as an example, that you can't use with AI. I kind of use this example. I was having a conversation yesterday where I was like, AI is great. It helps me optimize my job. It helps me understand what the customer is interested in or what our cohorts are. But it can't tell me why that 14-year-old is having a rough day before they go to school because they're having acne flares up, right? That AI can't tell me that information. It's my community that can tell me. So I'm using that as an example because I don't think there's going to be any type of replacement anytime soon. I think the reality is the best brands will use AI to make their teams faster, smarter, more customer centric. Where we're seeing a lot of the value right now and where we are using it, to answer your question, is customer service and support automation. That's really helped. Content creation at scale, but in a way that doesn't alienate that human connection. I think it's a tricky slope, or it's a slippery slope, I should say, in regards to generative AI. But personalized product recommendations, like we can build all of those on the site now. That's been around for some time. Inventory forecasting, demand planning, audience segmentation, predictive analysis. You know, I would say looking at post-mortem reporting on how a campaign did and how we're tracking. You can kind of use it for a lot of different things. We're also using it, for example, we're trying to grow our TikTok shop strategy. We're using it just for like automations on like how we're managing projects. So those are the ways that it can just simplify your role to keep the needle moving and not get bogged down by those. I think that answered your question. I have a lot of
no, absolutely. And the piece around, you know, we're building an AI business here, but we firmly believe that there's still a huge place for humans in the mix as well. Like, we're not building an AI business to try and replace humans. And you hear that sort of scaremongering out there that AI is going to take our jobs. And I think it's anything but that. I think AI is going to create more opportunities for for jobs and employment, because it's just going to change the way that we work, and it can absolutely help you, help us all, help businesses, help us personally, just like streamline our lives. Which I suppose then brings me on to the next question, which like what within the use of AI, what's had the biggest impact on you? And that can be personally or for your role. Like how has using AI or a particular tool like impacted your life the most?
Yeah, so I think in terms of how it's impacted my professional life the most is it really has been able, I've really been able to optimize my role and streamline my role in terms of like the hours it took me to write a deck. I can program my thoughts and build something out that way. I think that's really helpful. But I would also argue to say that AI is only as good as the input, right? And so really sort of trying to make sure that you're crafting your prompts in a really strong way to help you get the outputs that you want. I think in other regards, it's allowed me to be more creative in my role because I'm not bogged down by having to write dissertations on a brief, right? So I can optimize a lot of that and then spend more time thinking about creative ideas to really build a brand awareness and how can we create fun, more new experiences for our customer. Again, though, like I think we're still trying to figure out like how prompting can really streamline your life, because I remember when I first started leveraging it, I was like, I just spent 2 hours and I got nothing from this. So like I think you have to shift your mindset a little bit, and I think then kind of the world is your oyster.
Absolutely, no, totally agree. And I suppose and it leads back to like your in your role. I think about brand here. How do you see AI potentially negatively? So using AI for content creation and things like that. How do you see the impact of that negatively or positively happening for brands?
For brands, I would say, I think particularly the customer, I mean, everyone's using AI in their daily lives at this point. So, whether they know it or not, you're using it in banking, you're using it in your email communication. You can start drafting an email and Google will like finish your thoughts. Right. So I think, in that way, it's great. But at the same time, the consumer doesn't want to feel as though there's a lack of human connection, that lack of community. So that is a really tricky place. I would say if you look at like live selling in Asia right now, all of that's AI generated, and that is kind of the future. But I think that human connection and how we make people feel and how they connect with creative and that storytelling will be an interesting like chapter in terms of AI. But I do think that I would say like the consumer is just not quite ready for some of it. If it's like advertly AI driven, like if you look at like movies and commercials, short films, short snips that have AI embedded in them, I don't think anyone's noticing the difference, and it feels very fantasy. But if I was to be having a conversation with you as an example, like, and it's just you as an AI avatar, I just don't think the customer is quite there yet.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's think about customers not being certain places yet. How do you think consumer behavior is going to change over the next few years?
I think people are still going to be more skeptical and more like on the fence around how they're purchasing and what they're purchasing. I think people are not, they're not buying just products anymore. They're buying a fitment that actually works within their lifestyle, or an aspiration that they really want to build within their own personal life. And so I think that will still continue to be important. I would say in terms of consumer behavior, like I said, live selling, social commerce is going to change like significantly again, as it has over the years. I often say like AI is a boom right now, but AI will become just a standard part of our lives, just like the iPhone did. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that translates, over time.
Nice. Well, before we start wrapping up, I've got some quick fire questions for you. So
Okay.
just like the first thing that comes into your head. So number one, what's the most underrated marketing metric?
Ooh, the most underrated marketing metric. I would say, that is a hard one. I would say community growth, honestly, because the lifetime value of your consumer is really important. They are what's gonna help you get to the next 5 years.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. And what's one beauty trend that you think's overhyped?
Oh. Well, I would probably say a lot, but a beauty trend that I think is overhyped is slugging, which is like basically putting petroleum jelly all over your face. Not a good thing for the skin.
Well, that sounds pretty. Yeah, that sounds like it would be the case. And then on the flip side of that, then a beauty trend that's underappreciated.
I think a beauty trend that's underappreciated is, and this is going to sound cliche, but being really comfortable in your own skin and kind of having the willingness and understanding that your skin's always going to be changing. It's the largest organ on your body, and you have to kind of roll with it.
Yeah. Well, and the best bit of marketing advice you've ever received.
The best marketing advice I've ever received is, again, like I go back to, the idea of community over campaigns. Campaigns end, conversion ends, communities compound. The strongest brands create belonging, not just awareness. And so thinking about that holistically has really helped me make great decisions in my role. The other thing I would probably also say is try to be nimble, because if you get too bogged down around every single data component, you're going to lose traction, where the world moves too fast now.
Yeah. Cool. And finally, what's the one thing that customers care about more than what brands maybe realize sometimes?
I would say they care more about how you made them feel at the end of the day. They don't care about speed to market. They don't care about shipping. Yes, they care about those things, but at the end of the day, if they have a problem, it's how you made them feel through that experience that's going to get them to come back.
Yeah, nice. Great. So before we totally wrap up, then where's the best place for our listeners to find you in the business?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Erin Murray. I am happy to connect, would love to connect further and chat with other founders or teams or colleagues. I'm always excited to hear more about like cross vertical industries, etc.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks very much, Erin. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been so fun.
Nice one. Speak to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.